So our Torah portion, Tazriya Mitzorah, when we get to the idea of tzara'at, as I wrote in my commentary, tzara'at is some kind of skin disease. It used to be called leprosy. Most physicians, scientists believe that it can't be leprosy. And how the priest determines what exactly it is, and then a ritual for readmission into the community. I focused on that in my Shabbat thought. Maybe I'll get to it tonight. But the traditional interpretation takes the play on words that mitzorah sounds a bit like motzi ra. Lohotzi means to emit, to bring out, such as motzi lechem min haaretz, who brings bread from the earth. And ra means something evil or bad. So motzi ra is a rabbinic term that refers to gossip, lashon hara, destructive speech. And the idea is that in an ideal world, when we had dis-ease or disruptions in the self, it sounds very strange, that it would be right and proper if it appeared on our skin. The skin being, as Aviva Zornberg points out, is the medium between the inner life and the outer life. Now, why would this be a blessing? It would be a blessing because the minute there is something wrong in your spiritual body, your physical body would manifest it. Now, as Zornberg points out, the skin lesions on the body are signs. They're not symptoms of something wrong with the skin. There are signs that something's wrong inside of you. And how do you know when there's something wrong inside of you? When you hear yourself engaging in destructive speech. Now, why is this difficult for us? Because usually when we engage in destructive speech, there's something in us that unconsciously wants to be destructive. Let's think about the way that I talked about the 4 C's: criticizing, complaining, condemning, etc. Also gossip. I recently spoke to a person that said, somebody came to me and told me what someone else said behind their back, and I don't know what to do. I said, well, first talk to the person who told you and ask what their motivation was in telling you and why they didn't confront the person, and for their guidance on how to straighten this out. So, well, I already talked to the person. They said they can't tell me who it is. I said, that's already not a good sign, because somebody, for some reason, is protecting the destructive person and then sharing it with you and probably other people. Now, the idea of lashon hara, the rabbis are so serious about it that we know it was a constant problem, probably in small town society in which the rabbis lived. And they knew how utterly destructive gossip could be. In fact, in one of the most interesting passages in the Talmud, there's a long discussion on this destructiveness of what is called ona'ah b'devarim, or committing fraud through words, and that's mostly gossip. So the traditional rabbinic commentary is that this Torah portion has us look at ourselves, look at how we use our words. One thing we can do is, whenever, as far as a cure for gossip, first of all, I'll say some things I've said before. We should have very few gossip partners, meaning we all need to gossip and run things by people, but you can name who they are probably on one hand. So those are the only people you can process with, and their job is to bring you to reality. Their job is not to join in on the condemnation of others. They should certainly listen. We all need to vent. We all need to process what happens to us. But a good gossip partner can say, can I ask you a few questions? Meaning their job is not only to sympathize and let you vent, but ultimately for you to calm yourself down. As you've oftentimes heard me say, feelings are facts, but feelings might not be connected to facts. And so while feelings are primary in the inner life, they're not primary in the moral life. In the moral life, facts are primary. Now, feelings exist, no doubt. But if I have feelings about something, it very well could be that a lot of that is what I made up by myself for whatever reason. Meaning we fabricate truths in our minds, and then we operate on fabricated truths. Our feelings move in accord with our fabricated truths. And when we're communicating those feelings, we communicate them as if they are facts. And that's why in my thought for today, I took an extended look at the Kohen Gadol, and the job of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest in our parsha, is to make sure the person actually has tzara'at. Now, whenever I read this portion, I go back to myself as a kid watching black and white TV, the Frankenstein movies, and the peoples in the hamlets always had torches nearby. I'm not sure how that was, I guess sitting in their closet. And whenever they needed to chase down the monster, they all brought out those handy torches, and they ran up the hill to burn somebody. And I remember saying, wow, I hope they never run after me. Those people are just so ready to light a torch and burn somebody up. So when I looked at this parsha, and I tried to imagine a person has a skin lesion, you have the torch-lit parade ready to run that person out of town. And the Kohen Gadol said, well, everybody, wait a minute. We don't know if it's tzara'at. Let me take a look. And so I have this image of the mob of people want to torch something, have to calm down because the Kohen Gadol told them to. And then the Kohen Gadol says, I have to check it out. And there's nothing that will burst the energy of a mob as someone saying, everybody stop talking, let me see if it's true. Now, can you imagine in your life if someone said to a mob, could everybody quiet down? We're going to make sure that your feelings are connected to facts. It's really impossible in the human condition, but interestingly, that's what our tradition requires of us. So, when people say, oh, I observe the moral commandments, they say as non-Orthodox Jews, I think to myself, well, Lashon Hara, speaking feelings when you ought to try to tie yourself to facts. So we all assume that we're moral people, but then we find ourselves saying things that are very difficult to substantiate. So I think we mentioned last time, I'm very distressed by what's happening in Israel. But I want to tell you one of the greatest reasons I'm distressed. I'm agnostic on the judicial reforms. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not, someone who's an expert in Israeli constitutional law. I have thoughts, of opinions. They're no better than anybody else's. Here's what I'm concerned about. People say to me, whatever you think about Netanyahu, they say he's a fascist. For a Jew, that's a hard word. Hitler was a fascist. Stalin was a fascist in the sense of absolute tyrannical control over society. And I'll say, well, I think we Jews should be careful before we throw that word around because we've experienced what fascism is, and we've experienced what happens when you say things about people. It's the history of anti-Semitism. When they say things about people and people take it as true before they try to check it out. So I say to people, can you define fascist and can you bring some evidence to that? People very quickly move on because they can't define fascist. And if they can define it, they can't point to anything in Netanyahu's long career. Now, you may not like it that he's a right-wing conservative. I really get that. But it's hard to go from that to a fascist because there's a chasm of difference. So what I see in Israel is, and by the way, it bothers me here. I remember back, ever since I've been conscious, the way that people throw these kinds of words around. Bush was a fascist, and then Obama was a fascist, and Hillary Clinton was a fascist, and everybody's a fascist. Everybody's Hitler. Everybody's a Nazi. To the point that these words almost hollow out. So as you know, if you know me for any length of time, I'm really in favor of the rabbinic model of calming yourself down in community discourse, in national discourse, in interpersonal discourse. Calm yourself down. See if your feelings match with facts. And as Zornberg quotes in her discussion of this Torah portion, you want to be that person who seeks peace and pursues it. That's the ideal. Rodef shalom uvakshehu. A person who seeks peace, reconciliation with others, not to increase our polarization. That is not a Jewish value. So whenever it says, well, I'm after polarization because I think I'm right, I've never read anywhere in the Talmud that there is an exception for Lashon Hara. If we live in a polarized time, you want to get your point across, you do it in precise, factual language that anybody could check. So the topic of our Torah portion, which is skin lesions, the rabbis of the Talmud take it down to Lashon Hara, which always comes from some inner distress and oftentimes an inner unconscious desire to obliterate, destroy, be punitive, etc. And then in any kind of social discourse, it focuses, for me, it focuses on the idea that there's something that disturbs me and therefore I must attack it. And the incredible role of the high priest who says, everybody slow down, I'll examine it. And then what does the high priest do? He says, okay, the person has tzara, puts them outside the camp, gives them a chance to heal, and the high priest attends to them. And then the high priest performs a ritual to readmit them into society. It's a strange ritual. It's nothing that we're going to understand. But there's a ritual where the priest can say, now the person is tahor. They're pure. They can re-enter. They're naki. So the idea that we can see a person for one reason or another as highly disturbing, and there are some disturbing, annoying, bad people. But if they're in our lives, there ought to be a process of reconciliation, not to hold someone in as permanently bad, especially if they're trying to apologize, make amends, and so forth. So my takeaway for this is, of course, we should be like the Kohen Gadol. I know it's a high bar, that anytime you're around people who are talking with inflamed language, using very big words, offensive words, hurtful words, somebody has to be the high priest in the room. Somebody has to be the person who says, I really would love you to speak in more factual language. I don't know if you're using metaphors or if you're being precise. So if there's a metaphor alert coming, let me know it's a metaphor, but I would much prefer to know exactly what you're talking about. So here's what's distressed me. As I question people about what's going on in Israel, people revert immediately to hyperbolic, exaggerated language. And when I start to ask those questions, they moderate very quickly and they tell me what's on their mind. Right? And what's on their mind is very clear and probably sustainable. I mean, people have different opinions about these things. But then I ask myself, why didn't you start there? If by my asking a few questions, you can get yourself down to a calm, factual analysis of what you find wrong and why you're against something, why did you start with these supercharged hyperbolic words? And I think our tradition says that's something you work out within you. You have to have an internal regulator, an internal Kohen Gadol, an internal regulator against Lashon Hara. That's your work, and not to throw that toxic language out into the public domain, whether it's interpersonal or national. You do your work, and you be the kind of person, as we see in my Shabbat thought, if you'd like to see my extended comments on this, you be the person that tries to calm down other people, find out what's really going on, and then how to have informed opinions informed by facts and values, and then communicate those ideas to other people. This is a clear Jewish value. So when people say, I want to be a moral person, I want to be a good Jew, I want to live by Jewish values, this is a core Jewish value to which we should all aspire.